In the year 2167, Earth had become a patchwork of survival, its civilizations clinging to the fringes of a dying planet. The cities, towering amalgamations of steel and desperation, floated above the poisoned ground on magnetic platforms, casting long shadows over the wastelands. Among these metropolises was Ulcera, a decaying hive where technology hummed with a dissonant vibrancy, and whispers of forbidden experiments slithered through the alleyways like sentient fog. Agnis Solivar was a technician for the Aegis Core Corporation, a woman of 43 years whose eyes betrayed a life of sleepless nights and unspoken regrets. Her task was simple yet consuming: maintain the neural relay nodes that powered Ulcera's bioorganic mainframe. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept her away from the shadowy inner politics of Aegis Core, a labyrinth of corporate greed and veiled threats. She had always avoided digging too deeply into her employer's secrets. That was until she received the message. It came through her neural uplink as she repaired a node in the lower sector. A single line of text flickered in her mind's eye, disrupting her augmented reality display. "Find the silence beneath. We're still screaming." The words were cold and deliberate, carved into her consciousness like graffiti on a prison wall. She stumbled back, her hands trembling as she severed the uplink. But it didn't stop. The phrase repeated, burning itself in her mind until she could only hear those words. Then, as suddenly as it began, the message ceased, leaving behind an echo of dread. Agnis was no stranger to neural glitches. Living in Ulcera meant constant exposure to radiation spikes, system malfunctions, and the occasional rogue AI that breached personal networks for sport. But this was different. The words felt alive, their weight pressing against her skull as though they carried a desperate plea. She brushed it off, attributing it to fatigue, but her unease only grew when she returned home. Her apartment was a claustrophobic cube bathed in the sickly green glow of Ulcera's eternal smog. The air tasted of metal and decay. She poured herself a synthetic whiskey, hoping to drown the sensation crawling up her spine. But when she glanced at the mirror, she froze. Her reflection stared back with unblinking eyes, mouth ajar in a silent scream. It wasn't her face. Panicking, Agnis smashed the mirror with her glass, shattering the haunting visage into jagged shards. But before she could process what she had seen, the message returned, this time etched into the broken fragments. "Find the silence beneath. We're still screaming." The next day, Agnis confronted her supervisor, a wiry man named Keverin whose charisma was as synthetic as his cybernetic limbs. She demanded to know if there had been any unusual activity in the neural relay nodes, but Keverin waved her off with a dismissive chuckle. "You're overclocked, Solivar. Take a day off, reset your neural balance." "No one likes a glitchy tech," he sneered before walking away. But Agnis couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he let on. Her suspicions were confirmed when she intercepted a private message from Keverin's terminal later that night. The encrypted file revealed a location: Subgrid Theta 13, a restricted sector deep beneath Ulcera. It was a place she'd only heard about in rumors, a labyrinth of abandoned tunnels said to house failed experiments and corporate secrets too dark to surface. Compelled by a mix of terror and curiosity, Agnis decided to investigate. Armed with a stolen access key and a pulse gun she barely knew how to use, she descended into the bowels of Ulcera. The air in Theta 13 was thick with an unnatural chill, as though the walls exhaled despair. Agnis moved cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The tunnels were lined with ancient machinery, their once sleek designs now corroded and pulsating with organic growths that defied explanation. The walls seemed to ripple when she wasn't looking directly at them, as though reality itself were unstable. Then she heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't mechanical, but organic, like the sound of fingernails drumming against bone. Agnis followed the noise, her pulse gun raised, until she entered a cavernous chamber. In the center stood a towering structure, a grotesque fusion of metal and flesh. It pulsed like a heartbeat, its surface slick with a translucent ichor that smelled of rot. Embedded within it were human faces, their mouths moving soundlessly, eyes darting in frantic patterns. One face turned toward her, its features contorted in agony. "Help us!" it mouthed, though no sound escaped. Agnis stumbled back, her stomach churning. The message in her mind returned, louder this time. "Find the silence beneath. We're still screaming." She realized with horror that the structure wasn't a machine. It was a prison. These people, if they could still be called that, were trapped within its grotesque walls, their neural patterns enslaved to something far beyond her comprehension. As she approached the structure, a voice echoed through the chamber. It was deep and distorted, dripping with malice. "You shouldn't have come, Agnis Solivar." The walls quivered, and the faces began to scream, a cacophony of anguish that reverberated through her skull. Agnis fell to her knees, clutching her head as the voice continued. "You sought the truth, and now you will join us." The structure began to shift, its tendrils snaking toward her with predatory intent. Agnis fired her pulse gun, the shots tearing through the appendages, but the wounds closed almost instantly. Desperation gripped her as she searched for an escape, her mind racing. That's when she noticed the core, a pulsating sphere of light buried within the structure. It was shielded by layers of flesh and metal, but she could see it faintly, flickering like a dying star. Summoning every ounce of courage, she sprinted toward it, dodging the grasping tendrils. As she reached the core, she plunged her pulse gun into its surface and fired repeatedly. The sphere shattered, releasing a blinding surge of energy that threw her across the chamber. When the light faded, the structure was gone, leaving only silence. Agnis lay on the cold ground, her body trembling. She thought she had succeeded, until she noticed the faces. They were still there, imprinted on the walls around her, their silent screams a chilling reminder of what she had unleashed. And then, from the darkness, the voice returned, softer now, almost amused. "You cannot destroy what lies beneath. You can only awaken it." The chamber began to quake, and the ground beneath her feet gave way. As Agnis fell into the abyss, she realized the truth. The silence beneath wasn't a place. It was a force, a malevolent entity that had been waiting for someone like her to set it free. And now, it was awake. The descent seemed endless. Agnis felt as though she were plummeting through layers of reality itself, each one peeling away like the skin of an overripe fruit. Colors she couldn't name streaked past her, and sounds that didn't belong in this universe clawed at her ears. She tried to scream, but the air turned viscous, choking her voice into silence. Then, with a bone-jarring thud, she landed. The impact should have broken her, but instead, she lay intact, sprawled on a surface that felt like cold glass yet pulsed faintly beneath her. She opened her eyes to a surreal panorama that defied logic. The sky, or what passed for it, was a churning mass of black and violet, streaked with flashes of crimson lightning. The horizon curved upward, forming a dome that enclosed a barren, lifeless landscape. And in the center of it all stood it. The entity towered over the landscape, an impossibly vast amalgamation of shadow and light. It had no definitive shape, constantly shifting as if reality couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. Eyes, hundreds of them, opened and closed across its surface, each one larger than the last, their pupils glowing with a sickly green light. Agnis could feel them watching her, their gaze peeling away layers of her identity as if scrutinizing her very essence. Her pulse gun was gone. Her neural implants were silent. She was completely exposed. "You've brought me here," a voice rumbled. It wasn't external. It resonated from within her, shaking her bones with each syllable. "Do you know what you've done?" Agnis staggered to her feet, her mind a storm of panic and defiance. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to—" "To what?" The voice interrupted, its tone dripping with mockery. "Uncover a mystery? Save the lost? Or perhaps satisfy your insatiable curiosity? No matter. You've succeeded. More than you know." The entity began to contract, drawing its colossal form inward until it stood directly before her, a humanoid silhouette that still writhed with shadow. Its face was a blank void, save for a single, vertical slit of light that flickered like a dying flame. "Do you know what the silence is, Agnis Solivar?" it asked, tilting its head as if genuinely curious. She shook her head, trembling. I don't know anything. I just want to go home." The entity laughed, a sound that felt like claws scraping against the inside of her skull. "Home? There is no home. Not for you. Not for anyone. The silence is what came before. Before your worlds. Before your minds. Before the concept of existence itself. I am its echo. Its will made manifest. And you." It leaned closer, the slit of light narrowing to a sinister glare. "You are my herald." "No," Agnis shouted, stumbling back. "I'm no one's herald. I don't even know why I'm here." "Because you were chosen," it replied, its tone calm but unrelenting. "Your curiosity brought you here. Your defiance unshackled me. You've seen the prison. The faces. You know what they are, don't you?" Agnis's breath hitched as the truth struck her like a physical blow. The faces. The voices. The tortured screams. They're people. Souls. Trapped in the machine. The entity's form twisted, taking on a more grotesque appearance. Not trapped. Consumed. Their energy sustained the illusion of stability in your world. Aegis Core found the silence and tried to contain it, to bend it to their will. "But you set me free." The ground beneath Agnis began to crack, spiderwebs of glowing green light radiating outward. The entity raised its arms, and the cracks widened, revealing an endless abyss that writhed with shadowy tendrils. From the depths emerged a chorus of whispers, each one laced with despair and malice. "What do you want from me?" Agnis demanded, her voice cracking. "You've already given me what I want," it replied. "But I will grant you one final act of defiance, a chance to prove your worth. Run, Agnis Solivar. Run, and let me see how far your will can take you." Before she could respond, the ground beneath her gave way entirely, and she plummeted once more into the darkness. When she awoke, Agnis found herself back in Alkara, or at least a twisted version of it. The city was empty, its towering structures warped and decayed. The air was thick with ash, and the sky was an oppressive shade of black. She stumbled through the desolate streets, calling out for anyone, but her voice was swallowed by the silence. Then she saw them, the faces. They were everywhere, imprinted on walls, sidewalks, and even the air itself. Their eyes followed her, their mouths moving in silent pleas. "Help us," they mouthed over and over again. Agnis collapsed to her knees, her mind unraveling. I can't help you. I don't even know how to help myself." But as she spoke, something shifted within her. A faint spark of defiance flickered in the depths of her despair. She had unleashed this nightmare, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to undo it. "Silence," she whispered, staring at her trembling hands. "It thrives on silence. But what if I—" Her thoughts trailed off as an idea began to form, desperate and absurd, but the only thing she had left. She stood, her resolve hardening. "If the silence is the absence of everything," she muttered, "then I'll drown it in noise." She made her way to Olkara's central relay hub, the core of the city's neural network. The journey was harrowing, every step haunted by the faces and whispers. But she pushed on, driven by a mix of terror and determination. When she reached the relay, she bypassed the security protocols with ease, what was left of them, anyway. Inside, she accessed the main control panel, her hands shaking as she input the override commands. The system roared to life, its hum resonating through the empty city. And then she did something no sane person would ever consider. She amplified the signal to its maximum frequency, broadcasting a deafening pulse of raw data across every channel. The effect was instantaneous. The air itself seemed to rupture as the silence recoiled, its presence flickering like a disrupted signal. The faces around her began to fade, their expressions softening as though released from their torment. But the entity was not so easily defeated. Its voice thundered through the relay, shaking the entire structure. You cannot silence the silence, Agnis Solivar. You only delay the inevitable. The tendrils of shadow erupted from the ground, converging on her as she screamed in defiance. The tendrils lashed out with a terrifying speed, coiling around Agnis like living chains. Their touch was freezing and electric, sending shocks of pain through her body. She thrashed against them, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the entity's voice resonated through the crumbling relay hub. This defiance amuses me, little one, but you must know it is futile. I am entropy itself, the end of all things. What are you compared to me? Agnis gritted her teeth, her fingers clawing at the control panel. The amplified data stream continued to broadcast, a searing cacophony that rippled through the air like a sonic weapon. Even through her fear and pain, she could see the effect it had on the entity. Its tendrils flickered, disintegrating into shards of light before reforming. Its form wavered, no longer infinite, but struggling to maintain its shape. You talk too much, Agnis growled through clenched teeth, her voice ragged but fierce. With a final surge of will, she reached into the relay's core, bypassing every safety protocol and activating the emergency failsafe. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber as the relay's circuits overloaded, their energy building toward an imminent release. You will destroy yourself, the entity roared, its voice losing some of its earlier confidence. Better me than everyone else, she spat, slamming her fist onto the detonation switch. The relay core detonated with a soundless explosion, a burst of energy so intense that reality itself seemed to warp. Agnis felt her body being torn apart, her senses overwhelmed by light, sound, and a crushing pressure. For a brief, terrifying moment, she was sure she had died. But then the sensation stopped. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the relay hub. She stood in a vast, featureless expanse, the ground beneath her feet a smooth, mirror-like surface that reflected a starless void above. She touched her chest, half expecting to feel gaping wounds or searing pain, but she was intact. A voice echoed around her, not the entities, but something softer, fainter, almost human. You've entered the core of the silence. She turned to see a figure standing a few meters away. It was a man, or at least something resembling one, with translucent skin and eyes that glowed faintly. He wore a tattered suit that seemed to shift between eras, his appearance a collage of time itself. "Who are you?" Agnis asked, her voice trembling. "I am what remains of those who came before," the figure said, his tone weary but kind. "We try to fight it, as you have. We failed, as you have. But you've done something we never could. You've brought it here, to its raw state. Now you have a chance to end it." "How?" The figure gestured toward the void. As he did, the reflections beneath her feet shimmered, revealing a swirling mass of memories, faces, places, and moments frozen in time. Agnis recognized some of them. Her parents, her childhood home, even fragments of dreams she had forgotten. "The silence consumes meaning," the figure explained. "It devours identity, leaving only emptiness. To destroy it, you must give it more meaning than it can bear." "More meaning?" she repeated, confused. "Your memories, your experiences, your very sense of self. Pour it all into the void. Overload it with everything you are. It will fight back, and it will hurt. But if you are strong enough, it will collapse under the weight of your existence." Agnis stared at the swirling void, her mind racing. Could she really do this? Could she give up everything? Her identity, her memories, her life, to destroy something so vast and incomprehensible? The entity's voice interrupted her thoughts, rumbling from the void itself. "Do not listen to him. He is a fragment, a ghost of failure. You do not need to fight me, Agnis Solivar. Join me, and I will give you power beyond imagination. I will make you eternal." The figure's glow dimmed as the entity's presence grew stronger, its tendrils beginning to emerge from the void. "Do not let it tempt you," the figure pleaded. "You've already seen what it does to those it touches. This is your only chance to stop it. You must decide now." Agnis closed her eyes, her hands curling into fists. The memories reflected beneath her rippled, each one precious and painful. She thought of her mother's laugh, her father's quiet strength. She thought of late nights spent under Alcara's artificial sky, dreaming of a life beyond the city. She thought of the faces trapped in the walls, their silent screams haunting her. Then she thought of what the entity would do if it escaped. "I won't let it win," she whispered, stepping forward. The moment her foot touched the void, it reacted violently. The ground split open, and tendrils of shadow shot toward her. But Agnis didn't stop. She dove into the swirling mass, her body and mind colliding with the silence in an explosion of light and sound. The experience was indescribable. Every memory, every thought, every fragment of who she was unraveled, pouring into the void like a torrent. The entity roared in fury, its form fracturing as it tried to absorb the deluge. Agnis felt her identity slipping away, but she pushed harder, forcing every ounce of meaning into the silence. Her childhood, her first kiss, the day she got her job at Aegis Corps, the lonely nights, the laughter, the fear, the hope. And then, with a final, deafening scream, the void collapsed. Agnis awoke to sunlight. Real sunlight. She was lying on a patch of grass, the sky above her clear and blue. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of earth and flowers. She sat up, her heart racing as she looked around. Alcara was gone. The city, the smog, the decay, it had all vanished. In its place was an endless expanse of green fields and rolling hills. She touched her face, her hands, her chest. She was alive. But when she tried to remember how she had gotten here, her mind was blank. Her memories were gone, replaced by a calm, quiet emptiness. A single thought lingered, a whisper in the back of her mind. The silence is over. Agnis smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. And for the first time in years, she felt free. The tranquility of the moment stretched before her, but the more Agnis tried to absorb the peace, the more a faint unease began to gnaw at her. The fields stretched endlessly, and though the sunlight warmed her skin, there were no sounds, no bird song, no rustle of wind, no hum of life. It was as if the world held its breath, waiting. She stood, brushing the grass from her clothes, and took a cautious step forward. The ground felt solid beneath her feet, but something about it seemed wrong. Each step left no imprint, no disturbance in the blades of grass. It was as though she were gliding over an illusion. "Hello," she called out, her voice startlingly loud in the oppressive silence. There was no reply. She began walking, then jogging, her pace increasing as panic nipped at the edges of her thoughts. No matter how far she moved, the landscape remained unchanged. Rolling hills, endless fields, and a sky that was too perfect, too constant. She stopped, her chest heaving. "This isn't real," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she even realized she'd spoken them. A flicker of movement caught her eye. In the distance, just at the edge of the horizon, something shifted. It was subtle, like a ripple in a still pond, but it sent a chill down her spine. Agnis squinted, trying to make out the shape. It was humanoid, standing impossibly still, its outline shimmering faintly like heat rising from pavement. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice firmer than she felt. The figure didn't respond, but as she took a step toward it, it mirrored her movement, stepping closer in perfect synchronization. Agnis froze, and so did the figure. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Summoning her courage, she took another step forward. The figure mirrored her again, and this time, she noticed something else. Its face. It was her own. The realization hit her like a gut punch. The figure wasn't just mimicking her. It was an exact reflection. But while her expression was one of growing terror, the reflection wore a cold, detached smile. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "I'm what you left behind," it replied, though its mouth didn't move. The words echoed directly in her mind, as though it were speaking through her thoughts. "What does that mean? What is this place?" The reflection tilted its head, its smile widening unnaturally. "You thought you won, didn't you? You thought you ended the silence." "I did," Agnis said, But the conviction in her voice faltered. I destroyed it. You fed it, the reflection interrupted, taking a step closer. You poured every part of yourself into it, every memory, every piece of meaning. You gave it more than it ever had before. And in doing so, you didn't destroy it. The reflection's eyes glowed faintly, their light piercing and cruel. You became it. Agnis stumbled back, shaking her head. No, that's not possible. It's why this world is so perfect. The reflection continued, gesturing to the endless fields. It's why you woke up here alone. You are the silence now, Agnis Solivar. A prison of your own making, filled with the echoes of your memories. You wanted to destroy it, and instead, you've become its new vessel. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her mind reeling. The reflection crouched before her, its face inches from hers. But don't despair, it said softly. You have a choice. You can let this illusion continue, bask in the comfort of a false paradise. Or, it leaned closer, its smile disappearing, replaced by something darker. You can break the cycle. How? Agnis whispered, tears streaming down her face. The reflection stood, extending a hand toward her. The same way you started it, by embracing the silence, by letting go of the illusion entirely and returning to the void. Only then can you truly undo what's been done. Agnis stared at the outstretched hand, her heart pounding. The weight of the decision pressed down on her like a physical force. If the reflection was telling the truth, then the world she'd woken up in was a lie. But what lay beyond it? Would she return to the nightmare she had escaped? Would she cease to exist entirely? She looked around one last time, taking in the endless fields, the stillness, the perfection. It was beautiful, but it was empty. With a deep, shuddering breath, she took the reflection's hand. The moment their fingers touched, the world dissolved. The fields crumbled into ash, the sky shattered like glass, and Agnis was pulled into a maelstrom of light and shadow. The reflection's voice echoed in her mind, growing fainter with each passing second. Remember, Agnis Solivar, the silence is not an end. It is a beginning. When the chaos subsided, she found herself standing in a new space. It was neither light nor dark, neither solid nor void. It simply was a formless expanse that stretched infinitely in every direction. And she was not alone. Figures began to appear around her, their shapes flickering like static on a broken screen. She recognized some of them, the faces from the walls, the voices she had tried to save. They stared at her, their expressions unreadable. Agnis took a tentative step forward, her voice trembling. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. One of the figures stepped closer, its outline stabilizing. It was the translucent man from before, the one who had guided her in the void. You've already done it, he said, his voice calm and steady. You broke the cycle. You freed us. But what happens now? She asked. The man smiled faintly. Now we rebuild. Together. As the figures gathered around her, Agnis felt a strange sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. And in the heart of the silence, something new began to take shape. Agnis stood at the center of the infinite expanse, the flickering figures of the freed surrounding her. Their once blurred forms solidified, taking on the shapes of people who had been lost, workers from Olkera, forgotten pioneers, and even those who bore no resemblance to anything she recognized. Yet their eyes, though different in shape and color, all carried the same glimmer, the promise of a second chance. The man who had guided her, his translucent form now fully defined, spoke once more. You've undone the binding of the silence, Agnis. But in doing so, you've become a bridge. You carry both the remnants of destruction and the potential for creation. What does that mean? Agnis asked, her voice soft, her exhaustion settling into the marrow of her bones. It means, he said, that this is not an end, but an intersection. What comes next depends on all of us, but especially you. The silence was never just an entity. It was a reflection of emptiness, of meaning unfulfilled. And now, Where there was nothing, there is you. She took a deep breath, her gaze drifting over the others. The expanse, once void, began to ripple, faint textures appearing in the distance. Shadows became forms, fragments of cities, forests, oceans, shimmering into view like memories being recalled. It's rebuilding itself, Agnis murmured. No, the man corrected gently. You are rebuilding it. Every step you take, every thought you share, every choice you make is laying the foundation of what this space will become. But you must be careful. Meaning shapes reality here, and meaning can be corrupted. Agnis closed her eyes, her thoughts swirling. She saw the faces of those she had failed, the horror she had unleashed, and the hollow temptation of the illusory paradise she had left behind. Her guilt threatened to consume her, but she remembered the screams, the pleas, and the strength she had summoned to stand against the silence. Opening her eyes, she turned to the others. I don't know how to do this alone, she admitted, her voice steady despite her fear. You won't have to, a voice replied. It was a woman, her figure lithe and strong, her gaze piercing yet kind. We are all part of this now. Together, we'll shape what comes next. Another figure stepped forward, then another and another. They formed a circle around her, their presence steady and grounding. Each one carried memories, pieces of their lives, and Agnis felt their thoughts intertwine with hers. It wasn't invasive but collaborative, a collective mind forming not out of domination, but out of shared purpose. The space around them shifted again. Fragments of buildings rose, their shapes sleek and fluid, free of the decay that had plagued Ulcara. Grass began to sprout, green and alive, spreading in waves that seemed to pulse with vitality. Above them, the sky darkened, stars appearing one by one until it became a breathtaking tapestry of galaxies. Agnis felt her chest tighten as tears welled in her eyes. It's beautiful, she whispered. Because it's real, the man said, smiling. This place isn't a false paradise. It's built on truth, on pain, hope, and effort. It's what the silence feared most. Creation driven by meaning. But what happens if we fail? Agnis asked, her voice barely audible. The woman who had spoken earlier reached out, placing a hand on Agnis's shoulder. Failure is part of the process. If we fail, we try again. What matters is that we keep moving forward. Time passed, though it was impossible to measure. Agnis worked alongside the others, her hands shaping the world as much as her thoughts did. The expanse grew vibrant and diverse, a patchwork of dreams and memories given form. Where once there was silence, now there was laughter, conversation, and the hum of life. Agnis often found herself reflecting on her journey, the horror she had faced, the sacrifices she had made, and the resilience she had discovered within herself. She no longer saw her past as a series of failures, but as the stepping stones that had led her to this moment. One evening, as she stood on a hill overlooking a valley teeming with life, the man approached her. You've done well, he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. We've done well, Agnis corrected, smiling. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. You know, this place still holds traces of the silence. It always will, but that's not a bad thing. The silence wasn't inherently evil. It was a reminder of what happens when meaning is lost. Now, it's part of the foundation, a lesson woven into the fabric of this new reality. Agnis turned to him, her gaze steady. And what about me? What am I now? You're a maker, Agnis Solivar, a weaver of meaning. You are proof that even in the face of emptiness, something beautiful can emerge. She looked out over the valley again, her heart swelling with a sense of purpose she had never known. Then I'll keep building, she said. As long as there's something to create, I'll keep going. The man smiled, and as he faded into the background, Agnis felt a profound sense of connection to everything around her. The silence had ended, but its echoes had given rise to something greater. And Agnis Solivar, no longer bound by fear or doubt, was ready to lead this new world into a future shaped by hope and meaning.